So today we've got amazing guests from our network who we are so glad that we've got amazing companies, amazing people who we work with or have trained or have worked just in the network who want to spend a while sharing what they've learned to our peers through our lovely community. So with these meetups, we want to establish a way of kind of unofficial learning. And while I am very critical of what I'm spending my time on as well, I don't want to spend time on anything which isn't valuable. So I have always found that I'm learning a lot from our guests as well. And I've been working with Agile for 13 years. So it's really amazing to have these peer learning meetups. And we are so glad that we've got people who want to share. Now let's get into welcoming our lovely guests. So I met Michelle, Jeffrey, and Haley during last fall online. And I just felt when they were sharing what they have been doing for a couple of years already in ANZ, I was like, our community needs to hear about this. So I'm really glad to have you join our community and sharing some of your insights and learnings that you have had during the 2 years. I'm sure that our community appreciate that very much because the stories and the examples usually stick with you and you remember them when you start working with this yourselves. So let's get into introductions first. I would love you to introduce who you are, what you work with, and maybe, an insight or something that you're going to take forward now. We're going to talk about what you've done, but what is your next step going to look like? What's the thing that you want to improve next? So let's get a future look as well. Can we start with Jeffrey? Welcome, Jeffrey.
Hi, thank you, Rena, for having us. I've been with ANZ this is my 18th year in lots of different types of roles. I've always been around a bit of a satellite around learning and development, and then also right into learning and development, leadership, coaching, training, culture, all of the above. And what would I take forward from this transformation? This was a really exciting transformation for us because we'd seen other divisions go through it in previous years, and then it was our turn. It was really exciting. And I think what I'd love to take forward is that sense of excitement, because there's always something new to learn. There's always something new to experiment with. We didn't always get it right, but we all came together to innovate and be really creative and work out what we needed to do. And then we would pivot as a group. So I think that's what I'd like to take forward, is that excitement.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And welcome to the call. I'm excited to have you here. Can we hear from Michelle? Let's try your tech now. Yeah.
Technology. Hopefully you can hear me.
We can. Awesome.
So I'm Michelle Nebbs, and like Jeff, I'm from ANZ Bank. And for those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a universal bank based in Australia and New Zealand, hence the ANZ. We say Z in this part of the world. So my role is a portfolio lead, essentially, and also titled Tribe Performance Lead. This is all this lovely agile terms, which don't mean too much until you're in the fold. And one of the things that we have, I think, really tried to accelerate through our first wave of transformation is our end-to-end service delivery. And that's been super exciting. And we can talk to you more about that, Rena. But I think the things that we really want to nail next is how do we bring Agile into our core operations space? And that's tricky. We haven't seen a lot of examples of that around. So that's exciting.
Very, very cool. And welcome. Good to have you with us. Haley, welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Haley. I came to Agile and Agile coaching via IT, as many coaches do. This is actually my first time in HR. I've been at ANZ now for 2.5 to 3 years, and I joined just as we're about to kick off our transformation here. In terms of what we'd like to take forward, I think there's lots of ideas going on, but really thinking about where we're at the moment and some of the problems we're trying to solve, just really working with some of our leaders and our tribe performance leads in particular to sort of look at how we co-create and manage the book of work that we've got and the strategy that we want to achieve.
It's lovely to hear in all of your presentations when you were presenting yourself that you kind of everybody says that this is our next step and we've done some mistakes and we're trying to co-create and we're trying to fix the problems. So it's not like, hooray, we've done, you know, everything is easy and it's been a surfing ride down a nice wave. It's been a lot of work for sure. And it's not easy and it shouldn't be easy. I mean, it's a massive work what you've done. And I'm so glad that we can dive into the conversation. So today we're going to talk a bit about your journey into agility, and then we're going to focus a little bit around the portfolio management and the managing of a scaled agile team system. That is, I would like to say first that there are not many global HR teams that I've come across, and I've come across a couple of ones during my career, that are as far as this team is. And I told you, Jeffrey and Haley and Michelle, you're very far. And you were a bit like, oh, are we? But I want to say that you really are far. And that's why it's so cool that you are here to share. So let's start talking about journey. What does it really look like in practice when you start transforming a HR team? And I'm not talking about one team, but several teams and several professional teams towards agility on scale. It includes values, mindset, practices, ways of working, but would be lovely to hear a little bit, what does it look like in practice? And if I kind of, let's work this way that we kind of have a panel discussion. I'll give some turns to you, but please just pitch in when you have something to say, yeah? Could we start with Michelle? You've been working on this transformation for a long time. What are your reflections on what does it really take on scale? I mean, it's easier in a team.
Yeah,
right.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. And actually, one of the things that we heard when we actually embarked on this change was, oh, Agile, we do that already. And so we had a lot of people thinking that they were doing Agile. We're like, no, we're talking about scaled Agile. Every single team is Agile. We're not just talking about a project. We're not talking about, you know, a piece of work that you run with daily stand-ups. So that was an interesting mindset change for us. And the whole premise for moving to the way of working that we have moved to Rena was that we wanted to have end-to-end delivery to really optimize our employee experience. We wanted to really enhance our own employee engagement in terms of the way that we worked and be more connected and aligned. And then the third thing was speed to market in terms of the services that we deliver in HR. So that was the premise. They were adopted slightly from, you know, the rationale that we had in the broader business and the enterprise. Then they were more customer focused. We're focused on the employee experience. But then when you start talking scaled Agile in an HR function, obviously we all have perhaps more strategic advisory teams, and then we have these operational teams. And I mentioned in my reflection that, you know, we haven't quite nailed the Agile space or the ways of working space for our operations teams. And I think that the key thing for us is not all teams are equally Agile. So some teams are very focused on, you know, almost sort of Scrum and those kinds of practices for Agile, and others are very much just picking up some of the mechanisms and practices and tools like transparency and visualization of their work, and really trying to make sure that we had a suite of practices. So we were very deliberate in calling this ways of working, or at the time it was new ways, but we've had to drop the new because it's 2.5 years down the track. Ways of working suite of tools, very much underpinned by a mindset and a culture change more than anything. And then pulling on a whole raft of different practices that come under that really broad ways of working umbrella. Agile, Scrum, Safe, but also Lean, Six Sigma, human-centered design. So a really quite broad tool set. So we're really encouraging our teams to think about what's fit for purpose for them and what's really truly Agile and what is under a sort of a broader banner of Agile practices. And then I guess the other two things I would say here, Rena, is don't expect results overnight. We had this really amazing 12-week journey that we had mapped out, and we were going to be agile by the end of it. I think kind of 12 months down the line, we were probably just getting to that point, but we thought we would after 12 weeks. So it was very ambitious. And then the second component of that, so the third thing I wanted to highlight was, as you move into your new ways of working, it's really important to make sure you're letting go of your old ways of working. And we found that there was a period that really, we've really struggled through, where people just couldn't let go of their old ways of operating their teams, ways of engaging with their stakeholders, ways of thinking about their work. And so we were running 2 sets of kind of operating rhythms and structures and so on for a long time. And it took us quite a while to sort of chip away and really deconstruct the old ways of working. Well, we're never going to completely let it go, because we're a bank and we've got like compliance and regulation and all that kind of jazz. But yeah, getting to that point where you're actually genuinely moving into the new and letting go of the old, which is all the stuff that we know as HR professionals about culture change, right?
Wow, what an introduction to your journey. I can hear so many important things here, and just wanna highlight them to our listeners, because very great ideas here, very good learnings here. First of all, I loved how you mentioned that you have an objective for agility. Agile isn't the objective, you know. Agile is just means to get somewhere, and your somewhere was end-to-end delivery of employee experience. You had to enhance that employee experience and to speed up time to market, which means time to deliver products to your employees and your business. And that is very important, I think, for everyone on the line. Agility isn't your end goal. Your end goal is something else, and agility helps you get there. And the question is, where should we be agile? Where should we start adopting agility to get to these end goals? And where is agility maybe not that important, which was one of your mentions as well, that some teams it makes more sense and it brings more value, and in some less value, so you need to be able to establish that understanding. Then you also mentioned don't expect results over a short period of time, and one of my questions, which we can go back to later, is what kept you going? Because I see sometimes that organization starts transforming, they end up hitting these hurdles, which are very, very usual, my friends, very usual. And then some leader says, oh, agility doesn't work. Let's go back to normal, right? So that might happen. And you also mentioned one thing which is important. Agility isn't implementation of this one size fits all, but you went with a tray of ways of working. You had a tray of different tools, practices that teams can then pick up and choose from, whatever makes sense for them. And then the letting go of old ways of working was amazing as well. I think that we tend to cling on to those a little bit too long. But let's get into some comments. Hayley, could you comment a bit? Thank you very much, Michelle. Awesome run through of your learnings.
I don't know if I've got anything vastly different to Michelle to add, but I think just on that, it's not going to happen overnight. You won't see results overnight. If we sort of talk about the J curve of change, where things will go down a bit before they get better. We had a bit of that. We've got a very close-knit relationship type business and function, and everything was changed overnight. So there's definitely a bit of that. So you definitely got to work, expect that and work with it and be able to work through that. Was a really important one for us. I think the other piece that's a bit different to perhaps some of the other transformations I've done elsewhere is the work didn't stop. While we were going through all of this change. It has to continue. We're a highly operational function. It had to keep going. And so so that 12-week plan, if we could have stopped everything, maybe we could have done the 12-week plan, but we really had to work with the business and what we actually had to achieve at the same time, and work alongside that was other really key things as part of this change.
That's such a good addition, because, when we work with transformations on the customer side, what is really important is to keep on the sales and customer relations so that the customers are not seeing the results of the change going on in the back end in the organization. So I'm hearing you have the same thing. Of course, HR needs to keep up operations. HR needs to keep up the services while we are changing ourselves. So it is a parallel journey of gradual change. Very good that you raised that. Thank you. What about Jeffrey? What some reflections, some points that you would like to add?
Well, what I found is we really needed to ensure there was complete transparency with every decision that was being made, with how people were going with the actual transformation, that we are dealing with humans, and that there was an emotional connection to that old way of working that Michelle referenced. So letting go of the past was actually quite challenging for a lot. And we had to be patient with that. There wasn't any right or wrong way of behaving in that instant, and while we're going through that transformation, it just is what it is, and we had to be patient and allow people to vent and to try new things. If there was a bit of I guess focusing on what we did in the past and that worked for me, we would actually highlight that and talk about, well, how can we innovate from there? So that was something that was a little bit different, that we were so open and transparent with what we were working on, showing the other tribes that this is our book of work, this is how we chunk the work, this is everything that we're hoping to achieve. And I guess that level of granularity was a little bit scary as well, because we hadn't actually shared the work before like that. We hadn't put, we didn't have so many measurements in place or dashboards looking at, all the work as it was chunked to its nth degree. And we would then look at the portfolio as a whole and think about, well, what are we actually delivering to the business at the same time, and what can we prioritize, and how can we ensure that we're making the right decisions? So that in itself was a massive shift. But I think having that transparency helped that conversation.
That's very important. I think transparency can be scary as well for some people. When you start working, suddenly you're expected to show everyone what's going on in your project, and your teams have that chunk down. You need to have the backlogs. You need to be able to give some estimates on how much you can deal with during the next period. So it's a lot of learning on, the techniques of managing your work in the team as well. And previously it's been kind of hidden in, go to meetings, you write minutes of meetings, that's distributed to some people, then you share in meetings, and then you have emails going back and forth. But now everything is on display. So would you dare to comment on that somehow? Did you find, at least I find this happening in some transformations, and that needs to be addressed in a very nice way. So it's not forcing again, but yeah.
Yeah, we introduced a whole new range of ceremonies or different types of conversations. And we had different roles with different accountability. So people were still really trying to find their feet and their level of comfort with all of that. But they found, I guess we did a lot of demonstrations. So the coaches went in and also ran a lot of the ceremonies and led those conversations. These are the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. This is the benefit of these conversations. Some of them would be planning conversations. Some of them would be, let's look at the work 2 weeks later and refine what we actually had planned. Does it actually still make sense? What's actually going to work best to bring into our backlog? We had retrospectives as well, which is actually a bit of a learning opportunity. So we would look back at what we actually had achieved and how we went about it, and had I guess a bit of a discussion about, well, what could we do differently next time? How can we improve what we're doing? So I think trying to create a level of comfort through the conversations that we were having, all these new ceremonies and the new language that we were introducing, while trying to be transparent about the work, that we were all in this together. It took a lot of effort, and I think in times of pressure, it sometimes reverts backwards. You can see that people kind of go, I don't know what to do at this point in time. But I found that culture of sharing and transparency actually did help us move forward, particularly when we would show the data, on a screen in tribe planning, when we all come together to look at what we're actually delivering. That actually helped the group realize, we are all in this together. We are all in the one portfolio.
It does help. And what I think is remarkably lovely in this culture and the mindset is that we treat people as adults. We treat people as adults and say, this is where we want to go. Here is where we are. Here's everything that happens. Instead of that happening somewhere in the leadership rooms or leadership conversations, we're bringing people along on the journey. We're sharing as much as we can and trusting people to then being able to navigate according with the data that they get, to do their best job in the teams. Thank you very much. Awesome. So let's get into kind of, if you can mention some success factors with your journey, if you could pick up a couple of ones that you would even present to our listeners, like this is what we recommend to do, or don't do this. Maybe something that you've learned during the way when you got to here, and then we're going to focus on the portfolio for the rest of the time. Would be lovely to hear some success factors or what really helps with some key ingredients to succeed with scaling agility, not just in teams, but scaling. Can we start with Hayley this time, please?
Thinking about a few things, particularly when we're talking about scaling agility, really need to have sort of a level of consistency where it matters, but empowerment and ability to sort of make what works where it doesn't matter so much. So having some really good guardrails to work within. We're a really connected function. We can't necessarily make independent decisions on things because everything has a knock-on effect. So by being able to have some sort of that common practices and that consistency where it is important, that's helped us create that transparency, have those conversations that we need to have. So that's a really important one for us, I've found.
Love it. And
really
what you also said there, in kind of your side note, is important, because if we start changing one part of HR, we're going to end up in a situation where some of these connections, integrations, dependencies are broken. They are not working because we've changed one part, the other part is still doing it the traditional way or the previous way. And we need to be aware of that. So if we change performance management or rewarding structures, we might see that being affected on the talent side, on the recruitment and contracting side. And we need to stay awake because there are so many dependencies in HR as well. And then where it matters, super important. Thank you. What about Jeffrey? Could you add something? Key ingredients of learning to or succeeding in scaling agility in HR and people operations culture?
One of I think the best things we did was we ran these mastery, autonomy, purpose sessions, which was bringing key roles together to actually workshop real world scenarios about, well, how do we actually approach this particular situation? Who needs to be involved? Who needs to make the decisions? What happens if it doesn't actually go to plan? And we had our tribe leads, our tribe performance leads, our product owners, our chapter leads, our coaches all together we had panel conversations similar to this, actually, a panel conversation with a scenario, and then we would workshop it. And I found that those sessions were so valuable in actually making everyone feel comfortable that actually this is a bit grey and it is a little bit scary and we are a little bit uncertain. But actually, when we do come together, it does actually make sense and we can talk it out, we can debate it. It is a little bit different to the old world. And so there are new accountabilities and new decisions that need to be made with different roles. And I found that was actually quite powerful, and we held them regularly.
Yeah.
So that was probably one of the key things, just having that level of conversation to talk about real world scenarios.
It's a good test as well. It's a good test because if you have a scenario, I mean, we're working with this quite a lot with the leadership teams on business scenarios, and this is taking into HR. Here's a scenario, this happens. How do we deal with that in the new structure? Who is going to do what? So it's a very quick way of also checking, proofing, getting proof and validation that it works. Yeah, exactly. So awesome. Very excellent idea and tip there. Michelle, what about you? What would be your this is a success factor that you would bring up?
I mean, one of the things I'd highly recommend, which we found invaluable, was having some people who were experienced in treading this path before us. So to be honest, we didn't really find anybody who'd done this for HR, but we knew a lot of people in technology who had, gone through this process of standing up scaled Agile. They were in our group technology function, and they could outline, this is what's going to happen. It's going to feel like this for X period, and then you're going to hit a wall and you'll plateau, and then the next wave of change is going to feel like this. So having the confidence boost of knowing that broadly this is going to be the journey that we need to experience, and what we're feeling is typical. That actually helped us tackle the things that you were asking about earlier, Rena, with the blockers. So it's really normal to get to a point where people are going, we hate X tool and we hate this ceremony and we're just going to chuck it all out. And we did start with a few sort of core and common practices, and we really tried to nail them. And I think this links to Martin's earlier question, what tools were you using? We went, broad and deep with Jira. We had tried Trello, and it wasn't useful for us from a metrics or detail perspective, and it didn't enable us to think about it at a functional level. And we started introducing minimum standards and just nailing certain components and then moving to the next stage. We dedicated quite a lot of time for learning and support, and the types of things that Jeff mentioned, the MAPS session, we call them, on mastery, autonomy, purpose, what was one. But we also did lots of retros, standard practice in Agile is just kind of continuous reflection and learning. And there was a tendency for people to say, if we're going to drop a ceremony, it would be the retro, because it's the easy one to give up. But actually, that was one of the most important ones early on in terms of the journey, and just kind of keeping people reflecting and learning. And really, I think, making sure that we've got people who have that growth mindset that Jeff was mentioning. So, but for us, those are key ingredients.
Awesome. I think that what you've mentioned there is, it's a journey that you go on to, right? And if somebody else has gone through that hard journey a couple of times, they're not as worried. They're not as, they know how to guide others through the same hurdles that tend to come, or to figure out, co-create together, how do we solve things here? Because every change is, of course, unique. So really excellent learnings there. There was one quick question that I might ask. Time frame to quick wins, because you said 12 weeks and you realized, okay, 12 months where you wanted to be. But when did you start seeing these quick wins? Because on team level, those are quite quickly seen.
Yeah, I think at a squad level, we probably were seeing quick wins within that window.
Yeah,
Jeff, I mean, we were absolutely seeing a greater sense of thoughtfulness about what we were doing and how it was delivering for our end user, our employee. That actually changed fairly quickly. I think what was much harder is a sort of, and we'll get to this in your next set of questions, I think, that sort of management of the portfolio across the squads, across the broader units, which we call tribes. I know others call different, use different terminologies, but I think that part's been harder. But at a squad level, we were actually seeing a lot of that. And I think the business engagement at the divisional level, where we have, an HR business partnering model, they're still running Agile into their businesses. I think we were starting to see a different kind of engagement model with them in terms of the conversations they were having. So people sat up and took notice pretty quickly around that kind of stuff.
That's what others say as well. It's pretty quick when the business and your other parties start noticing that you do something differently, because you involve them in different ways. You start listening in with a different ear. You start using validation. You start bringing them into demos. This kind of things that they start seeing quicker results, at least smaller steps and increments of what you do. Brilliant. Okay, let's get into the actual really, really juicy thing, which very few companies have done in people operations, talent and culture. is the portfolio management. So that's a very trendy area right now. I don't think many people have realized how important it is that agility isn't just let's do Scrum on team level and let's have Kanban boards and retrospectives and have, improve as we go. It requires a structure and a discipline on prioritization. It requires a structure and discipline on who is going to meet who to make decisions, how often, how do we handle impediments or problems or blockers, which are natural that they pop up in different parts of the organization. As we said previously, a dependency might be broken. There might be roles that are unclear. There might be some traditional ways of working and now new ways of working, and we need to let go of the previous ones. So we need what we call an operating model in place. So how do we operate? Who makes decisions of what? And how can we establish that operating model with the mindset, with the logic and values of agility as well? So let's get into talking about the portfolio management. And now I'm not talking about the tools. So Jira is one tool. We work with another tool provider. Actually, we're going to start collaborating with them, who can combine Jira and Trellos and whatever planners, etc., into the portfolio level. So there are different kind of tools, but that's not the case today. I would love to start with talking about the senior level prioritization, because traditionally, or I would like to ask you maybe who are joining this call, do you feel that you've got too much to do? You are not quite sure about your real capacity of your team. So it's kind of what I call, post and pray, as you do in recruitment. You just post and pray that somebody's applying for your job. This is kind of start and pray that it will be done. So you just start a lot of things. You don't know if they will be done. You don't know the capacity of your teams. So that's where we talk about portfolio management. Senior executives who make decisions about initiatives, projects, what to start, should be doing those decisions with the understanding of how much can the teams actually deliver. That's portfolio management. So it would be lovely to hear some reflections on the senior executives and senior management, how they need to be on board with this and what is helping them to do that. Haley, you've been working with scaled agility in IT as well, and now in HR. Quite often we say that executives and managers can be the biggest blockers for agility. But I'm not sure if that's, I'm mentioning that sometimes. I could see that you've overcome that hurdle. Can you share a little bit about the reflections of that? How to get the senior management, those who prioritize, to understand what their role is?
I think it's a great question. We are very fortunate, I think, in our function that we do have a small, by our perspective, sort of 700 or so person, really well-connected function and a well-connected leadership team. So there is really, that connection helps us a lot. There's a real recognition that we can't make wholly independent decisions because we are going to impact each other. So we all come together on a quarterly basis, and we've been really working hard and continually working at how we, as a function, plan on a quarterly basis, the sorts of conversations we need to have, the trade-off conversations around how it connects to strategy, to what that business is asking for. And on the capacity front, we've been really working hard to bring data to our leaders to help them have that conversation. Without that data, it's a bit of gut feel, and I would say history has shown we probably overestimate our ability to do things without that data. So it's something we've really worked hard on, to actually get that history out of our teams, get them estimating their work, and to be able to bring that into that conversation so that we're getting a realistic understanding of what is possible for them to then add to what they would like to do or what the business would like us to do.
Exactly. I think that what you brought up is very important to highlight to our listeners here as well, is that you won't get into portfolio management with perfect data or data. You won't have that. It's going to be established as you start working with portfolio. It means that you might start with gut feeling conversations first, and you need to start listening and having retrospectives and getting feedback into those quarterly discussions of what was done, what wasn't done, what wasn't done, was it overly optimistic? That never happens in any HR teams, that we're too optimistic, right? No. So brilliant findings here. Thank you very much of those, Hayley. Can we hear from Michelle? What are your reflections on this to get senior stakeholders to kind of carry their role in this whole thing?
I mean, I think we were a little lucky, Rina, in the beginning that we actually had a leadership team aligned around the fact that they wanted to do this in the first place. It was something that they, it wasn't sort of pushed by one kind of disciple of Agile into the organization. It was very much a collective decision that was taken. I think they'd seen all the benefits and opportunities in the business already, so they had a little bit of a incentive. But I would say their level of energy around it differed. So, that's true about practically everything that we do, I guess, around a senior HR table. But in terms of a way of working and a way of operating, I think we certainly found that we got the most wins and moved the fastest where we went with, there was high energy and lots of interest in engaging with us. And, as we demonstrated our successes, it kind of brought the laggards along. I think one of the things that we learned as we were doing portfolio level discussions was we started most of our planning coming from the bottom up. So we did a lot of bottom up planning, and then we ended up with just so much stuff. It was actually really difficult to kind of navigate priorities and really start to make some decisions about trade-offs of things that we wanted to do. So we did, and this took us some time because we didn't really have enough data to do it early on. We start inflecting and really being quite more vocal and more directive about what are our most crucial priorities, and really asking people to think about those. We called them our big rocks.
Yep.
They might be your critical strategic or tactical priorities, I guess. We called them our big rocks, and really tried to plan and organize and focus around those and think about how we resource for those in the first instance, and then we could kind of add in all the other things on people's wish lists that were their favorite pet projects that they wanted to add into the mix. And that has been an evolution for sure. I wouldn't say we've nailed it, but we've certainly come a really long way on that journey. So getting that mix between the top down and the bottom up and bringing that together. Certainly that our coaches have been our sort of spirit guides through this process and really helping bring, all the great metrics to the table so we could have a data-driven conversation rather than a, favorite topic conversation. And I think the other component of that is this ongoing and collective discussions about relative priorities every quarter rather than just kind of a set and forget once a year, which is quite a different mode of operating from where we have been. So yeah, those were some.
And that's the thing. I mean, if when you're, sorry that I interrupted you.
No, it's okay.
That's the thing. When you're doing this quarterly and you start having the conversations, reminding the teams, this is the most important things that we need to get done. And again, trusting the teams to be able to navigate and shift their focus according to that message. But that also gives you a possibility when you do portfolio management to steer through surprises. So when you've got these outside disruptions like pandemics or a war, you might be able to quickly steer through, okay, we've got these things on our most important list right now. Now for the next quarter, we've got this thing that actually overrides a couple of things. So start navigating according to getting this thing coordinated, done, etc. So I think this brings the agility on scale. This is one of the key ingredients of being able to scale agility, is to be able to react to outside or business impediments. Suddenly there might be a new acquisition. You might acquire a bank in, I don't know where. And that requires a lot of work very quickly. So you might be shifting priorities there as well. Jeffrey, before we go into looking at your picture, can you share something that you think was important with the senior stakeholders in a short comment?
Look, I think COVID, because we were 6 months together face to face, then COVID hit, so we had to go online. And I actually think that that really helped us with the portfolio management, because when we did come together for quarterly planning, each of the tribe leads had to be really familiar with their book of work and really had to understand how it was going to be prioritized, what they needed to present back to the group. And that's still a work in progress, I think, across the board as we're working out how to do that in an even more optimal way. But I think that that actually helped our leaders be a little bit more familiar with also how they knew all of the work. They could see everything. They could see the bottom up, they could see the top down, and they knew, you know, how to, where to make a call. You know, they could speak to the benefits of every piece of work that had come through. And when they presented it at tribe planning all together, they could really talk to, okay, well, if we're going to have to make some sacrifices at work, this is probably the piece of work that we would do that to.
Correct. And you come
so it was great to have that view. Yeah.
And to portfolio lead, to portfolio management kind of leadership team or portfolio management meeting, it takes a lot of work to prepare one of those properly. From coaches, from the leaders, to be prepared to read up, to understand what sits in the portfolio, to understand capacity, value, prioritization. If I need to trade off something, what do I trade off? And go into those conversations with an open mind, with a facilitator that is prepared as well. So it's not just going to a meeting and sitting there and making decisions and writing that in a memo, right? So it is very, very disciplined and structured, and you need to be well prepared. Brilliant. Thank you very much. I'd love to come to look at your picture. Who was it? Who was having your picture, so you can describe how you're working with the portfolio management? And then I'll pick up a couple of questions.
Haley.
Haley,
I've got that. Let me share.
Hooray.
And all that preparation you talk about is exactly what we are right in the midst of right now. Right at the moment. So this is where we're at. This is a little bit of a picture about how we work, and obviously it's not too many boxes on the page, so I'll talk through it. At the top level, we've got 3 levels. At the bottom level, we have our squads or teams. At the next level up, we're arranged into tribes. Generally speaking, those are based around sort of an employee journey. So we've got one that's around sort of joining and moving, we call it. So recruitment, movements across the company, international mobility through to offboarding. Another one that's around sort of our ER well-being. And so those tribes are arranged around predominantly the journeys. And then we have at the top level our function level or portfolio level. One of the key pieces here is that we really want to let, at our team level, we want to let them make what prioritization decisions they can make and manage what they can manage. At the tribe level, we want to do the same. And we only want to try and push up to that sort of top level, those real key pieces where we, there are big strategic items or there are challenges in meeting them in sort of tribes or tribe to tribe, but we need to get them done. So on a quarterly basis, what we do is our teams will be working along throughout the quarter. Their product owner, who sets the direction for the team, will be looking at all of the things that are coming up for the next quarter that either they must do or could do. Whether they're requests generated by the team themselves, and will be then towards the end of quarter sort of coming up with their candidates for what they think their next quarter might look like around here. And then depending on what's needed, they can either push that straight into their tribe planning, or they might need to elevate that up into our quarterly function-wide planning. So our function-wide planning really focuses on those large strategic items and those big rocks, or our top 5 or whatever we're calling them, those big items, as well as anything that's been escalated up because the lower levels can't solve them for themselves and think that they're critical. It's a process that way back when really just started with dependencies. It was just a conversation about dependencies. It evolved, and this changes at this point every quarter. Feels like we haven't quite nailed it yet, but we are getting closer and closer and better every single time. It sort of evolved from dependencies through to more focus on problem solving. And we are now evolving from that to a little bit of problem solving, but really looking at those sort of key strategic pieces and the key priorities and trying to focus it around trade-offs and decisions. So we're pushing that way as we go. What happens if a piece of work comes in outside of that quarter planning, as happens quite frequently? Again, so where we've got our little yellow things, something comes in unexpected. Hopefully we've retained some capacity for that. That's a conversation we're having at the moment with a recommendation that we should be retaining 10 to 15% capacity, because we know work will come up. So if you go in full at the start of quarter, you're already over. So again, if it's a small piece, it can be managed in your team, great. If not, elevate it up. If it can be managed within your tribe, conversations between tribe, great. And they have check-ins and pieces where they can do that. Again, great. If not, elevate it up. And we utilize our tribe performance leads, our TPLs, who meet on a fortnightly basis to look at planning prioritization, to really sort of be our connectors between the tribes and that elevation point there, for if something does actually need a decision that goes beyond one tribe or two tribes agreeing together, and we need to take that function-wide view and priority to make sure that can be achieved.
This is such a great picture, and I love how you bring in this surprise element as well, because that's one thing with being agile. I think the capacity management, that's tricky to handle, and that's tricky to nail. You won't be perfect at that, but at least you've got some kind of ballpark idea of how much surprise work comes in that you just have to deal with, that you need to do. And that helps you also with the portfolio management. Can you go back to the previous picture? Yes. So here, just for everybody who are listening in, portfolio management at best isn't, I want to say what it isn't. It isn't that leaders sit together and decide what everybody else will do. So you can see here that the beauty of how ANZ had put up their portfolio management is that you mentioned that the teams can decide as much as they can on team level. If they need to elevate something as much as they can on tribe level, and again, the only things that you need to decide on portfolio level are the things that can't be decided on tribe level or team level. And I think this is something that I really want to highlight to people who listen into this, is that it isn't top-down leadership. This is coordination, dependency management, trade-offs, capacity understanding, making sure that the teams remember to work according to strategy. Would be lovely to hear a couple of comments from Michelle and Jeffrey. Thank you very much, Hayley, for sharing this, and amazing. Can you leave the picture up here if Jeff or Michelle would like to comment on something before we go into one or two questions?
I mean, it looks simple, but I think one of the things that we've worked out is sometimes that, that up and down is an iterative process. It's just not one point in a quarter or over a couple of sprints. So, and I think the other thing that we found with portfolio management is, and this goes back to one of the other questions that people were asking in the chat about leadership, is we're not talking about how this work is going to be done. We're talking about what work is being done. So that's a little bit different for a leader to, kind of let go of like the how as well as the what. So those conversations tended to bleed early on into, well, how are you going to do it and what's that's going to look like, and really trying to pull ourselves out of that conversation into what is the work, what is the scope of work, what is the size of the work, what, we called it our acceptance criteria and our definition of done, and really nailing that. So then, the tribes have the autonomy to go off and deliver as they know best to do, and probably are closer to the work and probably make better decisions about how to do it than some of our, very senior leaders who may be very far away. So that's been a real shift.
It's a big learning journey and growth journey for a leader as well to start leading this way. Very big learning journey. Thank you for mentioning that. Jeff?
I think for everyone, it was because it's a constant conversation. Initially, we had people treating the quarterly planning as events, and they were, there was a lot of work that's going into this event that I needed to prepare. But actually, it was more of a conversation that flowed through the entire year, which is, I think everyone's still, not everyone, but there are some people that are still getting used to that piece.
Good addition there. So, and there's a lot of preparation going into this, a lot of conversations going on all the time. Awesome. Now let's pick up, if you can, Hayley, stop sharing. Let's pick up a couple of questions. How do you manage healthy dynamic workload and maintain an individual well-being in this, start working with Agile?
One of the focuses in Agile is really about what we term sustainable pace. We should be able to pick up a manageable amount of work that is enough to keep us a little bit pushed and engaged and energized, but not overload us. And I think it's the way we sort of work in the shorter cycles and with smaller pieces and turning around whole things. And I think that really helps us. I think we can, it's really important. It creates that transparency around when things are on track or not. They don't disappear into a little black hole with some person who's snowed under, overwhelmed, and not seen. I think there's the team dynamic and the team shared accountability for getting the work done. The fact that we have stand-ups each day that check in on the work and the transparency around how that's going and how people are going, and that chance for everyone to pitch in. A term that gets thrown around a bit is about swarming behind a piece of work, but about, if something's behind it's a high priority, everyone being able to, jump in behind it and help out. Those are really important.
I think what you're mentioning there is that it's you're not alone, and you can always raise it. It's transparency will help you, and you've got the team. And if you can't do something, you can't do it. It needs to be prioritized as well. So I think that brings a lot of well-being into the teams. One last question. How do you appreciate agile behaviors, or do you disincentivize non-agile behaviors? Can you, Michelle, take this question, please?
Yeah, well, we actually haven't been explicit about agile behaviors, but we've definitely been explicit about the types of behaviors that have enabled success in this way of working. So, like all organizations, we have, recognition and reward programs. But I think one of the things that we found really quite powerful as a tool is a showcase. And really leveraging showcase as a bit of a tool to allow people to, trigger a little bit of their kudos buttons. And, that tool of being close to the stakeholders, being close to your senior executives, showing your work on a regular basis and getting that kind of really dynamic feedback has been actually a really unintended consequence of this process, but actually has been quite exciting to see as a recognition lever. In addition to the standard stuff that we would, you would expect any large corporate to do around recognition and so on, and behaviours. Jeff, have you got any other examples that?
Sure.
Sorry.
We built a maturity framework to help us identify these are the behaviours that you'd expect to see when you're moving through various levels of maturity, and these are the practices that you'd expect to see. So we try to make this clear as possible about what we were looking for.
And I would say also, my tip is don't disincentivize anything. Don't make it this a good or bad, old or new thing. It is really through positives and through finding that joy, and that getting established ways of getting things done is usually very, very rewarding for people, and seeing what's being done and sharing as well. I want to say a massive, super big thank you from here in Finland to you in Australia. It's been a lovely hour learning about your journey, learning about portfolio management. You are so very far, and I'd love to bring you back in a year or two to hear where you are then. It would be lovely to kind of continue the journey and saga with you. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, Hayley, and Michelle, for sharing and taking the time to be with us. Thank you everyone who joined today, and hope that we can see you in one of our meetups or trainings later on. Have a fantastic week and weekend, everyone.